So I want to introduce Steve Murray. Steve Murray, as you know, is from Beets Farm in Berkley, Massachusetts. Him and his wife, Sarah, co-own the farm, and they grow it's a diverse certified organic vegetable farm on 10 acres. It's, I think, predominantly still a CSA with a spring, summer, fall, and I think petite shares. They have had a farm stand. Steve can let us know. And in the past, they've also participated in farmers markets, summer and winter farmers markets. Steve worked with the Carrot Project, or started working with the Carrot Project way back in 2017 with a business advisor. And he also received a loan, which I believe is pretty close to being done with. So let's just jump right into the questions, Steve. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so obviously making your farm work in today's market is demanding. So I wondered if you could talk about what your special sauce is in terms of your business model.
All right, I had a few things that I had written down. I think the first and most important thing is we have some long-term employees. Well, a long-term employee, Lauren. She's been working with us since 2013 as like a full-time. She doesn't have a title, but she's essentially like second in command. And to have someone that long on your farm, and she's kind of learned. We've kind of changed scales. We started off pretty small, about a little under 2 acres, and now we're actually managing 36 acres now.
Wow.
A lot of things have changed how we do, but she has been there to kind of help us with that transition instead of always trying to find someone new and train them up to a scale that I didn't know how to train someone at. So that's been pretty important. We started a CSA Facebook members group pretty early to get people involved. And that has been really good for retention. Our retention rate has gone up. And then we've tried to focus on what we're, I don't want to use the term good at, but what we want to be good at. And I've tried to drop the things that I'm not. So like, we'll come about this eventually, but we dropped all our markets this year. Essentially, we saw that sales were going down. I couldn't hire enough employees to work in the field anyway, so I couldn't hire people to work at the markets. And then our CSA actually almost doubled in size, so it kind of all played out. I'm better at CSA growing because I can kind of just do how I want, and I don't have to be as consistent as a market. So.
Great, thank you. And can you talk just quickly about what led to the shift from, I think, 10 acres, which was maybe 2 years ago, to the 36 acres that you're farming now?
Right. So in 2013, I think we had one rented property, the one that the house and the land that I'm in right now. And then the year later, we added another property that was from a CSA member. And 2 years ago, we added 26 acres, which is a property about a mile down the street. And we've been trying to rent that property for since 2013. And the farmer that was using it for hay hadn't hayed it for 2 years, and the owner finally wanted a change. So we took that over. Okay,
great. Thank you. So now that people have a sense of what you're doing, I'm just curious to know, as a lot of times people ask when we do these things and we don't say anything about the Carrot Project, well, I didn't learn anything about the Carrot Project. So tell us, as a farm is growing and starting, like, you rely upon a lot of different resources, including, obviously you're your biggest resource. But can you just say briefly why you, if you recall, why you got involved with the Carrot Project way back when?
Right. As you had mentioned, I had applied for the mega grant, the Massachusetts Enterprise Grant for Agriculture, and I received that. And as part of that, you needed matching funds. So it was up to $20,000, $10,000 matching. So we needed the $10,000 to match the grant. And at that point, we didn't have the money in the bank, or we couldn't predict that they were going to have it for the future. So we knew of the Carrot Project from CMAP. I think Sarah Cogswell had worked with the Carrot Project for a little bit. Yep. So I knew from her that you guys existed. And then I think I just sent some very short email.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's helpful. Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. So right as the farming season started, was starting last spring, that's when the pandemic, you guys were getting into high gear, right? And you were thinking, okay, we're launching into the season, and then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and it's changed a lot of things in our society. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what have been the biggest impacts on your farm and on your business.
Right. Honestly, it's been mostly positive. We saw sales go up pretty dramatically. Last year, we had 120 summer CSA members, a mix between premium, petite, and standards. And this year, we're over 210 just for the summer. Our spring went from 75 to 90-ish, and our fall has gone the same, from 75 to about 90. So sales-wise, everything has gone up. We did drop our markets. We actually decided to do that when the pandemic first started. Sarah was uncomfortable going to the actual markets in February, so we shifted to an all online at farm pickup, so people could order using Google Sheets or Google Forms, and then we get the printout from Google Sheets. And that went from maybe 10 people ordering a week to 60. So that's we didn't necessarily try to hire more people, but the number of people that we had on the farm kind of stayed where it was last year, but the number of hours that they worked went down, and the amount of work went up. So I think that was a little bit challenging because our CSA went from people would pick their own shares. They come in, everything would be labeled, they take what we tell them to take, to us needing to pack out all the shares.
Okay.
So we added about 6 hours of labor just in the pack out with less labor. I had made some purchases last year and this year, so we invested like another $35,000 about in just new stuff, equipment. So we had a lot more tractor-based stuff. So I think that helped kind of level off the negatives.
Okay, great. So when you, obviously it's not yet the end of the season, but we're heading in that direction. And so I wondered, as you reflect on kind of what you've learned and the changes that you've made, if there's what you think you'll keep heading into the, as you plan for next year.
Yeah, so we're gonna stay a CSA focused farm. We're not gonna go back into the markets. We also dropped our farm stand. So I think we're also gonna keep the farm stand dropped. It's kind of helped with work-life balance because I don't have to tend the farm stand when I want to play with my kids. And then I think we're just going to keep mechanizing. We're just going to keep adding equipment. Labor, the cost of labor is going up. I feel like they should be paid more anyways, because a lot of the people that were working there, it's skilled labor. And we need to keep the tasks that they do the most productive. In case we're in another situation where we have less hours, we need those to be the most productive. So I think those are kind of the lessons I've stick with. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. So I have one last question before we open it up to everybody else. You as a farmer, and this is kind of stepping back from your farm, but you as a farmer, you're on the front lines, obviously, of our farm and food system. So thank you for that. And I wondered if, reflecting on society at large, your community, the pandemic, racial disparities that have become even more evident in our food system, long line at food pantries that seem to keep growing and growing. I wonder how you think about a just and resilient food system.
It's a very big question.
It's a huge question. So you can take any piece of it you want and answer it for you, for your farm, or more broadly.
I cannot speak too much on a lot of it. I'm a very privileged person to be who I am and where I am. But I think we need to preserve more farmland and make it more accessible. I think that's just the number one lesson across all of it. Massachusetts put out the infrastructure response And I was amazed that they should just be buying farmland. Because that is the key. You know, if we preserve more farmland in the Northeast and we were able to get more young farmers on that farmland and not go bankrupt, they would be able to sell to people who need it the most. I think, unfortunately, a lot of us smaller farmers in the Northeast, we end up with a lot of guilt around like growing practices, like are you going to use plastic, or you're not going to use plastic, the environmental concerns, who you're going to sell to. And a lot of it comes down to is a lot of it's out of our control. You know, I can't just say I'm going to sell my product for less money if that means I can't investments that's going to keep me in the farming game for the long term. You know, I don't think there's much of a benefit of me selling at the lowest price to the people who need it to then losing my farm business in 2 years. So I'd rather just support policies that I think are beneficial.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's a good answer. So thank you. So so now I want to open it up for question and answers. And so folks, feel free to turn on your video so we can see your face. And if you have a question, unmute yourself. And Jenny, I don't know if you want to get us started with a question? Or anybody else? Elizabeth.
I've got a
Get her hand up first. Myrna, you're next.
Oh, sorry, Myrna. Steve, are you growing vegetables solely? Near me, there's a farm that has recently gone out of business, even though it was extremely popular because they found they couldn't make a living just doing vegetables, and they, with a young family, just didn't have the oomph to think about diversifying into including meats in some way.
I think I would go out of business much faster if I focus on anything else.
Really? So
you're
only
vegetables, yeah.
Wow.
I think the amount of investments needed to do animals properly is, I think, higher than vegetables, and at a different scale. You can't just do like 200 chickens. We're talking, 1,000 layers, and I think mixed vegetables is already complicated enough.
Yeah. Well, your customers are really lucky to have you. They're really lucky to have you.
And we do have a lot of, well, that's not true. We have some other producers of meat, eggs, and poultry in the area. Yep. And some of our customers are used to shopping with other people.
Sure. Yep. Nice. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Myrna.
So I'm going to ask about marketing. I'm interested to know if you were seeing before the pandemic hit any drop in your CSA rate. You said that your retention was good. Were you seeing any problems before the pandemic hit? And then how do you think people found you to account for the growth in the CSA after the pandemic?
So I would say that it was getting harder to find replacement members. We're staying pretty stable. It felt like I couldn't grow past 125 without diversifying the number of drop-off locations and spreading into new areas, which is, we did add 2 new drop-off sites this year, but we're dropping them. We're going to go back to the ones that we have. I have not done the research on my end on finding out where those members found us, but often they were family and friends of last year's members who were on the cusp of joining, but they weren't ready to join. And it wasn't planned. Often where our CSA shares are too abundant, which is definitely a problem in the CSA world. But because of the drought, our shares were smaller. I mean, they're still very large. But I think that's actually been a benefit because a lot of our members joined as petite shares, which are their every other weeks. And those members ended up being really happy because they felt like really successful, that they were supporting a local farm, that they're getting through like, oh, I'm getting through all this food. And really it was like less food than we had been giving out. So I think that played in our favor going towards next year. We also started doing early enrollment. So last 2 years ago, we used to do a 21-week summer CSA, but we decided to drop the 21st week and we used that as a bonus sales week. So if you signed up for like this year, if you signed up for 2021, you get that bonus 2020 week. So we already have 50% of our members signed up for next year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
with deposits.
Nice.
I think that's pretty beneficial.
It's fabulous.
Like we're almost at the level that I was at 2 years ago, CSA number wise. So.
Nice.
So just if I can ask a follow-up question. So it sounds like the boost that you've gotten from the pandemic, that you, at least for next year, see that as following through.
I think so. I think a significant portion is following through. And we steered those new members toward the smaller share. So if they're joining for the first time and they contacted us, we put them into the petite share. And I think that helped a lot. Having a lower, it's lower price. It's less vegetables to get through because a lot of people don't like eating that many vegetables. I think all those things were in our favor.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope I'm not blindsided next year though.
Awesome. Yeah, just before Elizabeth, let me see if anybody else has a question.
Sure.
And we'll come back to you.
Fine.
Anybody else here?
Question in the chat if you'd like to, if you're just getting your thoughts out, but it's hard to jump into the fray, and I'll see it and mention it for you.
Great. Well, go ahead, Elizabeth.
This actually is, I think, a question for you, Dorothy. Steve, I'm thinking back to your comment about pricing in order to stay in business, and I just thoroughly support you in that. There's no benefit in young farmers having their hearts broken and their bank accounts broken. That's not a long-term solution. In Vermont, we have an organization called Salvation Farms that has gotten a lot of cleaning going in the area, and they're just going gangbusters right now, harvesting food that farmers themselves aren't able to pick up, and getting it into the food bank system. And I wonder, the founder, I'm sure you know Dorothy, is Teresa Snow, and she's been at it for actually probably about 20 years now, but I feel like it's really gaining momentum, and I wonder if there's any gleaning movement activity in Massachusetts to address the kind of, to help ease the kind of concern that Steve has.
So there's several gleaning organizations in Massachusetts. There's the Boston area Gleaners, and then there's one out in the Pioneer Valley. And I think there's also several other gleaning organizations. They also work together. So, and I know that they're hitting into high gear now as, the season's starting to wind down. And so I think that, they are helping, but it's, in terms of the food pantry demand, it's huge.
Yeah.
If that's what you were thinking.
And the population difference between the two states is really significant too. So,
yeah.
Alrighty, thank you.
But I think they're pretty well connected they work closely with the different food banks. So there's a strong network for all that.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it shouldn't
Great.
fall to farmers to try to change the economic.
Yeah.
That's
not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. So we have time for one more question, if anybody has one. Okay, well then I just want to say, go ahead, Jenny.
Hey, so Steve, I remember reading a couple of years ago that you had I think a low income share, or you were working with a food bank. Is that correct? I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that.
I think we were hoping to follow in the steps of Flying Carrot, or what is now Flying Carrot Farm, to do that, but we never met a third party to help set that up. I would love to be able to offer that, but again, I honestly, I don't think I have the time or the ability. Those shares are often on a weekly paid basis. So like it changes the whole dynamic of the CSA, and whether or not there's another party to pick up the balance on the unpicked up or unpaid for shares. There's just lots of layers there that, you know, I think it'd be great for some organization to take on and do that. But also might not be the most effective way to get needed vegetables into people's hands. If you're handing off a CSA that has contents that they're either not willing to cook or interested to cook, it may not be like the right way. We sell the Coastal Food Shed in New Bedford, and they got a grant to buy food at retail prices from local farmers this year, and I think that was pretty great. We sold a lot of vegetables to them at retail prices, which felt good for all the parties concerned. So there was local food going into those food pantries, but you know, we were also getting paid to do that, which I think is a pretty, it felt good for everyone involved.
Yep.
Thank you.
So I'll add that we also will have, I don't think it's been announced yet, but Apollo Catella from Oasis on Ballo, which is in Codman Square in Boston, will be joining us. I think it's the week of the 20th, October 20th. We'll get that out soon. But he also will have, for those of you who are able to join us, he is working specifically in low-income communities. It is a nonprofit. It's a farm working out of a nonprofit, but to try to figure out how to address the issues in that particular neighborhood. But yeah, well, I just want to thank Steve very much for joining us, particularly because you have enough to do and for answering my questions and other people's questions. And thank you all for your questions. And I think it was good to hear how, I think I'm heartened that your farm was impacted in a positive way. And I hope that continues. And I think that's one of the challenges for us to figure out, for those things that are happening that are positive out of this pandemic, how do we maintain those over time so that, you know, we can kind of keep a resilient food system and continue to build the local food system. So thank you for that. I guess I just want to say in closing that you've heard Steve and other farmers, we'll hear later, working through their questions about the pandemic. And actually that reminds me of my question, which I didn't ask, but I won't ask now. But really, we're just here to help people think through questions. Usually we're working with people that are in a much earlier stage than Steve is at this point. We worked with him many years ago, but helping them just figure out what they're going to be doing. We have business advisors and trainers. They're ready to help people figure out how they can either recover, respond to, or make decisions about, you know, what are they going to be doing instead or differently or keep, with an eye always towards their long-term success so that they can make these decisions on their own and they don't need our help anymore. So I want to thank you all for your donations. And if you haven't made a donation, please consider doing so you can help people like Steve and others at earlier stages of their businesses. And if you haven't, you know, our goal is to reach $140,000. So, you know, please do that. And thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you can join us next week and in the conversations to come. And so we're officially over, but we'll hang around here if people have any additional questions for a few minutes. So thank you and bye to everybody that's got to go.
Dorothy, you said you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know, let me think, it was when I was talking about this, when I was saying something about, I wanted to know, well, I guess Myrna kind of asked that about the, I was curious to know about the kind of the uptick and how to maintain that and kind of, so I'll be curious to know, yeah, just looking for data, like how do we keep these people like engaged? And it feels like your petite share is probably a great way to do that, so it doesn't frighten them. All these vegetables, what am I going to do with it? It's a hilarious thing to say, but like, you know, people do get overwhelmed by too many vegetables. And it can take a while to know how to, you know, put them by and figure out, you know, how to incorporate it into their meals and things like that. So yeah, I guess I was curious to know, so it sounds like you have about, you said 50% signups. So are you anticipating that you probably won't have to do a lot of marketing?
I am. I think, within the 50% remaining, I think there's 25% of 50% of the 50% will sign up. They just either, this time of year, we have people that stop showing up for CSA because they get busy because of school. And that combined with the pandemic, I think has led to people just being overwhelmed and not able to take advantage of the bonus week. So I think they will be joining us. That means we only have to fill 50 shares. And I did essentially no advertising this year for this year's CSA. I had a budget for it. I just didn't do anything because we filled up. So I'll have to come up with some plan to do that. We came out with another share as well. So we have our standard share, we have a premium share, we have a petite share, and now I have a flex share.
And so did you say that you ended up, are you growing different? I know you're growing. Yeah. Are you growing? Did you reduce your diversification, the number of vegetables you're growing or anything like that? Or
no, acreage went up this year.
Acreage went up. Okay.
Stayed essentially the same.
Okay. Cool. And then can you say anything more about the Facebook group? I'm just curious to know, what do people like about it? Or what are you doing to get them engaged?
So that's based off of Shared Legacy Farm. They did a interview on a podcast a few years ago, and they had this Facebook group just for their members, and we would post, like, I do a live unboxing every Monday. So I bring my own premium share, box what's in it, and I tell them how to store it, how to do that. People post a lot of food pictures and what they eat with it. And then I also try to post some things like, hey, I failed. Like my fridge still is kind of full and it's Sunday and I have to get more vegetables. And it's trying to show that it's okay that some of our vegetables go into the compost. Because there's almost this, I don't know how to define it, but when people have to compost our vegetables, it's worse than when they have to compost something else, and try to get them over that like some weeks are going to be really hectic and you're going to eat the vegetables that you can eat, and that's okay. And then some week, you didn't get to the kale, and that's totally fine. And then we have some long-term members. So we have some members from before we were Heartbeats Farm, and they're often a lot of the content now. So they're posting, they're answering people's questions. Like, I don't have to respond to every question. Someone might be like, oh, like, what time does CSA open up till? And like, I didn't look at my phone. Someone else posted response. So it's kind of built to the point where I have members working for the farm.
Okay. Cool. I see Silvermine Farm might have a question.
I do. I see.
Hello.
Quickly, what advice would you have for new and beginning farmers who are frequently and perhaps predominantly using farmers markets as their, if not primary, a very significant part of their business plan, given the fact that, you noted the decline in profitability at farmers markets over the course of some amount of time? Right.
I knew from the beginning that I was not a farmer's market person. I'm not great with strangers. So it just wasn't my type of thing. I would suggest going online and joining one of those platforms because they streamline a lot of stuff. I'm stubborn, so we're still using, Google Sheets and Google Forms, which is one way, but it's a lot more work on the back end. But I see that being more prominent, or if you can, there's nothing wrong with wholesale. The margins are lower, but you're also spending less time setting up at market. You have employees at market. If you have a good wholesale customer, it's money. Again, we sell a coastal food shed, and I get a check when they pick up the food. So it's like money right there. I would talk to Skinny Dip or some other market focused farm for their what they're doing. I think they shifted a lot to online sales, so that might be where it's going. Good luck. I don't have a good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? Jan.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jay. The name is always confusing. I know, I appreciate
Okay.
it. It's a quick question. This isn't really, this is probably a slightly more difficult one to answer, but how do you feel about like local food aggregators that are kind of pulling, I guess, as much as they can from local markets to try and service local markets? Is that something you've seen a lot of? Is it something that you are going to, try to keep more of an eye out for? Is it something that just doesn't occur right now?
So in our part of Massachusetts, we're often behind. So it might be a different answer for someone in a different part of the state, but we don't have that occurring right now. I think local food's still on the cusp of something that people do a lot. Again, not to say Coastal Food Shed's name too many times, but they're working on becoming an aggregator, which is already what they do. So instead of me servicing SNAP customers through the Healthy Incentive Program, I then sell to Coastal Food Shed, who does that part for me. I sell them at a wholesale price, which is, I think, is beneficial for both, well, for all three parties. I'm not opposed to that. If it increases sales and it doesn't cut the farmer's end too low, I think it can be really beneficial.
Cool, thank you, much appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think in 2 weeks or next week, Marty's Local, Nick Martinelli from Marty's Local, who he did set up he set up a distribution business. I think it's like 4 or 5 years old now, and basically it was to aggregate local food and get it from within local. We'll see how the business evolves, but the idea was that there's plenty of distribution, to aggregate it and get into Boston or get it to New York City or something like that, but there's less to kind of just feed within the local food economy. So he's based out in Western Massachusetts, and it'll be interesting to see kind of, he'll have a certain take on it. They work with about 70 different farms. And I think to some degree, those that I do know that work with aggregators extensively, and maybe Silvermine Farm can talk about this too, but it tends to be farmers that are slightly large, that have acreage and they have extra stuff that they can, easily turn over multiple acres into one product or crop. It can be helpful, but yeah, it's tough because, you do want the farmer to stay in the game and get a good price that makes their business work. So I think it probably comes down to their individual business model as to whether it makes sense for them or not.
Did he, in his evolution, did he bump up against some food safety issues on aggregating? And
we will hear. We helped him. Yeah, we helped him get off the ground, and I haven't kept up with it too much. It kind of died down and then, kind of took off. So we'll hear in a couple of weeks what happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the food safety issues. I know initially it was just going to be veg because of food safety issues, and I don't know. Obviously, the food safety has evolved, and I don't know if they've taken on meat or not, or dairy.
Yeah.
Silvermine Farm.
Oh, I think you're right, Dorothy. But part of the food safety issue is gap requirements that many chains require for fruits and vegetables, and now it's the Food Safety Modernization Act. And like with GAP, the stores, lawyers are telling them, regardless of an exemption a farmer has, don't take it, require all of this stuff. So I think that it all comes down to developing enough economy of scale to be able to sell at the wholesale level. And now that includes all of the work required for these food safety issues, which is a burden of time and paperwork, as well as slight changes in agricultural practices in some cases. So ultimately that it is a challenge for smaller growers. So the larger ones tend to have better capacity.
Mhm.